Conquest had arrived earlier during the Invincible War? What if he clashed with the evil Invincible variants while Mark still had strength to fight? Today, we dive into the brutal alternate timeline, where the Golden Conqueror descends into chaos, not as a final blow, but as the storm that changes everything. Witness how a single early arrival reshapes the bloodiest war in the multiverse. The sky remained tinged with red, as if the cosmos itself foretold the war that was unleashing on Earth. Every corner of the planet had been devastated, and the fight, far from calming, continued growing with unstoppable violence. The forces were becoming exhausted, but hope seemed to fade with each passing. Second Mark, the one everyone knew, stood among the rubble, breathing with difficulty. His left leg, broken by the impact of a previous blow, caused him unbearable pain with each movement. The battle with the evil Invincibles had left deep marks on his body, but what really worried him was not the physical pain, but the fact that he felt unable to maintain the pace. He was on the verge of defeat, and that terrified him more than any wound. "I don't know if we'll be able to handle them," whispered If, approaching Mark. With a worried look, she observed the scene with fear, but Mark looked at her, steadily determined for her to leave. "You have to go now. If you stay here, there will be no way to defend you. They won't hesitate to kill you if they have the chance," said Mark, his voice tense, but with a firmness that could only hide the pain if with her heart compressed. Understood she had to listen to him, even though it hurt. There was no time for more words. Sadness reflected in her eyes, but she knew she couldn't stay with one last look at Mark. If moved away, disappearing among the rubble. The evil Invincibles advanced with sure steps as if they were certain of their victory. Omni-Mark, Sinister Mark, the Mark with Mohawk, and the Masked Mark. All of them represented an incarnated nightmare. The Mohawk Mark, with a malevolent smile, was the first to move toward him. "Do you think your frame, ideals, will make any difference?" shouted the Mohawk Mark. While launching to attack, Mark, weakened, barely had time to dodge the blow when the Mohawk Mark's kick impacted his side. The sound of bones crunching resonated in the air. Mark fell to the ground, and the pain of his broken leg intensified, taking him to the limit of consciousness. He remembered the injury he had suffered before, the one that had cost him so much time to recover from, but this time the pain was much worse. The Mohawk Mark laughed, enjoying the torture. Sinister Mark, taking advantage of the distraction, hit Mark from behind with all his strength, knocked him down even more, letting his body collapse with brutal violence. "You're no longer the best, are you?" murmured Sinister Mark with a cruel smile, while approaching, enjoying the humiliation of his enemy. Mark tried to stay conscious, but the combination of pain and exhaustion was defeating him. The injury in his leg limited him, and his ability to defend himself was diminished. Despite everything he got up slowly, his face did not reflect fear, only iron determination. Omni-Mark, who had observed with disdain from the distance, finally intervened with a mortal jump. He landed in front of Mark, and with dizzying speed threw a direct punch toward his face. Mark barely could block it, but the impact was so strong that his arm bent backward, causing more pain. "Come on, keep fighting, that's what you want, right?" shouted Omni-Mark while continuing his attack, breaking Mark's defenses again and again. The Masked Mark didn't take long to join the combat, attacking with impressive speed with an agile blow to the head. He knocked down Mark, leaving him dizzy and vulnerable. Mark's body couldn't resist much more. Each blow brought him closer to unconsciousness, just when everything seemed lost. A nearby explosion made all the fighters stop. For a second, it was Conquest, who had been observing from the air. His imposing presence forced the evil Invincibles to stop respecting their leader's authority. "Enough games," shouted Conquest with a thunderous voice, his gaze fixed on Mark, who lay on the ground, bloodied and almost without strength to defend himself. The evil Invincible stepped aside, giving way to Conquest, who descended like a golden figure with his strength. He intimidated everyone. Mark, overwhelmed by pain, couldn't even get up, and his gaze kept meeting Conquest's cold eyes. "Do all of you look alike?" asked Conquest, looking at the evil Invincibles. The tone of his voice was charged with cruel curiosity, his gaze fixed on Mark, whose breathing was increasingly heavy. The Mohawk Mark, enraged by the humiliation, had returned to the charge with a roar. He launched toward Conquest with explosive force. He delivered a direct punch to his face. His scream resonated in the air. "Why do you attack this weak version of me? I want to kill him with my own hands." Conquest didn't take even a second to react with superhuman agility. He caught the Mohawk Mark's arm with one hand, as if he were a child trying to resist a storm in a single movement. He broke his arm as if it were a brittle branch, provoking a guttural scream of pain without giving him time to react. He lifted the Mohawk Mark's head and with overwhelming force, smashed it against the ground, making the earth around them tremble. The evil Invincibles who observed from the distance were completely stunned. The strength and ferocity with which Conquest had defeated the Mohawk Mark not only gave them a sense of powerlessness, but also fear. A tense silence filled the battlefield, a moment where no one dared to make the next move. But Conquest showed no mercy. Seeing the opportunity to destroy them one by one, he launched with lethal speed toward them, flying in the air. He reached the Viltrumite Mark with a brutal blow, throwing him through a building. The impact was so strong that the evil Invincible spat blood and fell unconscious to one side. Omni-Mark and Sinister Mark, both observing the devastation with eyes full of fury, looked at each other in silence. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, without a word they coordinated in a single movement. With inhuman speed, they launched a joint kick toward Conquest. The impact was strong. Conquest received the blow directly in the face, retreating a few meters backward. Surprising even the two Marks with the resistance, he showed blood flowed from his mouth. But his gaze, although wounded, remained cold, and Sefton out, calculating with a growl. Conquest got up, looking at Omni-Mark and Sinister Mark with mortal intensity. The fight had just intensified, and the evil Invincibles now knew they had awakened the true monster with a brutal movement. Conquest raised his arm and threw a direct blow to Mark's chest. Impact was so strong that Mark sent through the air, crashing against a nearby building. The impact left Mark even more injured. His broken leg and his destroyed body could barely stay conscious. Conquest, wounded, implacable, rose again. His penetrating gaze directed toward the two Marks who had dared to challenge him. The ground trembled with the force of his presence. The fury in his eyes was not that of a simple warrior. It was the fury of a conqueror who had been challenged on his own terrain, and no obstacle would stop him. Omni-Mark and Sinister Mark stayed together, coordinating their movements with millimetric precision. But Conquest, with a contemptuous smile, was not going to allow them to have control in the blink of an eye. He launched toward them with a speed that not even the fastest could foresee. First, it was Omni-Mark who suffered with a turn of his body. Conquest delivered a blow with his elbow direct to his chest. The impact was so brutal that a crunch was heard, and the air was expelled from Omni-Mark's lungs, leaving him breathless. The evil Invincible flew backward, crashing against a concrete wall with such force that the entire building partially collapsed without time. To celebrate Conquest, turned toward Sinister Mark, who was trying to take advantage of the moment of distraction to launch to attack, but before he could even take a step, Conquest caught him by the neck with one hand. Without any effort, he lifted him from the ground and crashed him against the ground, creating an expansive wave that raised dust and debris around them. "Is that all you have?" shouted Conquest, his voice full of contempt while seeing both evil Invincibles recovering slowly. Sinister Mark, stunned and barely conscious, tried to hit him with a fist, but Conquest, with a mocking smile, dodged it, and with inhuman speed, hit him with his knee in the stomach, making all the energy of his body overflow and be expelled violently. The impact was so strong that Sinister Mark fell to his knees, coughing blood and unable to recover. However, Conquest had no intention of letting him rest. With a roar of fury, from among the debris rose the Viltrumite Mark. Although gravely injured, his fury had not disappeared. This evil Invincible, known for his extreme resistance, was still willing to fight, but his body covered in blood and fractures moved slowly with a roar before the Viltrumite could do anything. Conquest reached him with a punch to the face, piercing his jaw and flying through several buildings. The explosion was so strong that a crater formed in the place where the evil Invincible had been before chaos. Was at its peak. Most of the evil Invincibles were out of combat, and the battlefield was a spectacle of destruction. The nearby cities collapsed under the weight of the violence that was unleashed there. The terrain was covered with blood, debris, and bodies, but Conquest, still standing, showed no signs of fatigue. Mark, who had been observing everything from the ground, got up with effort, his legs still broken and destroyed. Made it difficult for him to move, but the determination in his eyes was unbreakable. IF had fled, but he couldn't allow himself to let his enemies win. Not this time. With heavy breathing, Mark, injured, determined, approached Conquest, who observed him with a mixture of respect and amusement. "I'm still not finished," said Mark, his voice hoarse and full of determination. Conquest looked at him with a cruel smile, his eyes full of anticipation. "Whatever you say, boy," responded Conquest, while his fist closed, preparing for the final blow. Mark looked around, trying to orient himself. And it was then when something made him freeze in the distance. Among the debris and destruction, he saw a figure that froze his blood. It was there, standing, surrounded by remains of the fight. It was Armstrong, the same Armstrong that he had given up for dead. Mark couldn't believe what he was seeing. His mind began to spin like a whirlwind. So much time had passed, and he thought he had finished with him, that he had been the one who had killed him in that fight. "It can't be," he whispered to himself, his face paling the memory of that battle, that last look of Armstrong before being hit with all of Mark's strength invaded him. The impact, the brutality of the blows, the sound of bones breaking, all of that filled him with growing anxiety. He had been sure that Armstrong had died, but there he was, standing with a fixed and cold gaze, with labored breathing. Mark took a step back, trembling. "Why? Why are you still here? Didn't I kill you?" His voice wavered, fear and panic controlling his words. Armstrong, with his immutable expression, observed him for a moment. A slight gesture of disdain crossed his face. "You thought you killed me, right?" said Armstrong with a grave and mocking voice. "But no, I'm not so easy to get rid of. I made it clear to you then, and I repeat it. Now you won't kill me so easily." Mark was paralyzed, unable to process the scene in front of him, his words were interrupted. While he took a step back, his mind still struggling to understand what was happening, Armstrong took a step toward him, his body still covered with wounds, but with a twisted smile. "It seems you've forgotten a small detail, Mark. I'm not the type of person who dies so quickly. You thought the fight was over, that my story had already reached its end, but there's still much to do." Mark, with his heart pounding heavily in his chest, could barely believe what he was hearing. Guilt and panic overwhelmed him, but before he could say anything more, Armstrong raised a hand, pointing to the chaos around him. "You have no idea what you've unleashed. You thought it was over, but you haven't even begun to see the worst of me." Mark was completely overwhelmed. Doubt, confusion, and fear of what he had done invaded him. How far had he gone? He thought he had killed an ally. And now, that same enemy was standing in front of him. What do you want from me?" asked Mark, full of desperation. Armstrong smiled, a smile full of malice. "What I want from you, Mark, is for you to die." In that instant, Mark's face changed the reality that Armstrong was alive, and worse yet, that he was involved in all this. The appearance of the evil Invincibles. He thought everything was over, but in reality, he was much further from the end than he had imagined. But something else was clear. Armstrong wasn't going to let him escape so easily. With one last look at Mark, Armstrong turned toward Conquest, ready to continue with what he had begun. After this, you and I still have accounts to settle, he said firmly, without showing any sign of weakness. Armstrong observed Conquest, his gaze full of fury and determination. Conquest's eyes shone with arrogance, but he didn't seem intimidated. On the contrary, he smiled defiantly, knowing that the fight was just beginning. Armstrong took a step forward, his voice resonating with mortal calm. As for you, I'll take care of killing you for messing with my prey. His tone was cold, and although his body was wounded, his will to destroy Conquest was unbreakable. Conquest, with his smile of superiority, looked at him fixedly and laughed in an almost mocking way. Your portals will be nothing against me. The certainty in his voice was palpable, as if he knew that nothing could stop him. Armstrong, without taking his eyes off Conquest, raised his hand and a portal opened, showing the latent energy of his power. We'll see that soon, he said, while preparing for the next assault. Conquest, maintaining his defiant posture, moved forward a little, ready for combat. Your portals are nothing more than tricks for a show, but you have no idea what it means to fight against someone of my caliber. Armstrong didn't hesitate. His gaze intensified, and with a gesture of his hand, he created a second portal, larger and stronger, throwing a wave of energy toward Conquest. The air around him tensed, charged with an energy that could break the ground if not controlled Conquest without losing his composure. Prepared to resist the impact, both looked at each other fixedly, knowing that this would be the beginning of a brutal battle, one that could decide the fate of all involved. The question remains, in a universe where power reigns supreme, does timing matter more than strength? What do you think would have happened if other players had arrived earlier? Drop your theories in the comments below. If this alternate timeline left you questioning everything you thought you knew, smash that like button and subscribe for more mind-bending what-if scenarios. Hit the bell icon to never miss when we dive into the darkest corners of possibility. Until next time, remember, in the multiverse of infinite outcomes, every choice echoes through eternity.